Okay, so I am about to send this WiiM amp to a patron. But before I do that, I want to talk about the WiiM amp again, not least because our original video is closing on 500,000 views since it was published last December. So thank you to everybody who lent their eyeballs to that video. And with that much viewer interest in mind, I'd like to follow up with a few more thoughts on the little streaming amp that could. Now, these thoughts are predominantly derived from my replies to viewer comments underneath that original video. So yeah, there will be plenty of whatabouting in this video.
This episode is brought to you by PSB loudspeakers, whose Imagine T65 and T54 tower speakers deliver a spectacular listening experience.
Welcome back, everybody. Yes, it's easy to get lost in the numerous details of the WiiM amp or be blinded by its $299 sticker price. So let's boil it down to some bare essentials. The WiiM amp is a streamer, a DAC, and a loudspeaker amplifier in one box. And it can also talk to a subwoofer and a TV. But let's focus on the streaming component for a moment, because it really is extremely comprehensive. So out of the box, we get Spotify Connect and we get Tidal Connect. And if you don't want to use either of those two, you can use Apple AirPlay 2 on an iPhone or Google Chromecast on an Android phone. And we also get support for Roon Ready and very unusually Squeeze Lite. So the WiiM amp can run as a virtual squeeze box. But if you know of a better spec'd streaming product than this one, then please let us know in the comments section below. But please make sure to tell us the make and the model and the current retail price of that product. And please also list the streaming protocols that it offers. Now, two network streamers that have an identical streaming suite are the WiiM Pro and the WiiM Pro Plus. And the WiiM Pro sells for $179, the Pro Plus for $249, mainly because the Pro Plus has a better DAC inside. Now let's conduct a little thought experiment.
Is he serious?
If we remove the WiiM Pro and Pro Plus's features from the WiiM amp, we're left with HDMI ARC, subwoofer management, and a 60 watts per channel into 8 ohms speaker amplifier. That means that best case scenario, the Texas Instruments Class D speaker amp module is a $120 add-on as far as we're concerned with consumer spending. And worst case scenario, it's a $50 add-on. But for the sake of simplicity, let's call it a $100 add-on because the HDMI ARC input and the subwoofer connectivity don't come for free. So the way I see it, the amp inside the WiiM amp is a $100 amplifier at best, and we must adjust our expectations accordingly. So now we have to ask, which third-party amplifier could we add to the WiiM Pro for $100 or to the Pro Plus for $50 to equal or better the WiiM amp's performance? Obviously, I don't have that answer, but I'd sure as hell like to know if you do. So if you know of a decent-ish amp selling for $100, let us know in the comments section below. And no, secondhand doesn't count, because pricing and supply varies wildly from one territory to the next, or from one country to the next, or from one state to the next. You get the idea, right? But whatever the answer, we can be sure that the end result won't have an HDMI ARC input or a subwoofer output, because the WiiM Pro Plus and the WiiM Pro don't have those features. What about the Arylic B50? Now, to the casual observer, including one of our original video's commenters, the Arylic looks like an even better deal than the WiiM at around $130. However, whilst the Arylic does combine a 50 watt per channel speaker amp, a subwoofer output, and a DAC with HDMI ARC access, it only supports Bluetooth for streaming. So we don't get Spotify Connect, we don't get Tidal Connect, we don't get AirPlay, we don't get Chromecast, and we don't get Roon Ready. What about AV receivers? Someone wrote in the comments of the last video that you could get an AV receiver with the same feature set as the WiiM amp plus room correction for the same price as the WiiM amp, $300. And as we know, AV receivers tend to come with subwoofer management and HDMI ARC as standard. But when pressed for the make and model of such AV receivers, our commenter revealed that he had bought a refurbished Denon AV receiver for $300. However, a bit of Googling revealed that this receiver, which is no longer a current model, could be had brand new for $380. So that sounds kind of promising, right? Yes, but that's until we learn that the Denon AV receiver's streaming module is HEOS based. So that means we get Apple AirPlay, we get Spotify Connect and Tidal Connect, but we don't get Chromecast or Roon Ready or Squeeze Lite. The Denon doesn't have the streaming comprehensiveness of the WiiM, and I really value that streaming comprehensiveness if it's not already obvious. Okay, so what about the WiiM Mini paired with an outboard amp? We would certainly keep a hold of the WiiM's comprehensive streaming suite that way, wouldn't we? But if we've only got WiiM amp money, so $300, once we've dropped $90 on the Mini, we only have $210, I do the maths there, for an integrated amplifier or AV receiver. And if we want to keep a hold of HDMI and subwoofer connectivity, we really want an AV receiver. So now we ask, what current model AV receivers sell for $210 retail or less? If you know, let us know in the comment section below, because if a reasonable contender materializes, I'll buy it and I'll compare it to the WiiM amp before giving it away on Patreon. What about the Sonos amp? Because someone pointed out in the comments that the Sonos app is far better than WiiM's app. Now, I'll not argue that point, but WiiM's home app I think is still pretty darn good. But frankly, once I'm done with network onboarding and settings adjustment, Sonos's superior software environment is only really useful if I use it to play music, and if I don't use AirPlay or Spotify Connect or Tidal Connect or Roon Ready or Chromecast. But I do. I've said it before and I'll say it again. The WiiM's streaming suite is extremely, extremely comprehensive. So comprehensive that I rarely have to pull up the WiiM Home app to play music. But John, the Sonos amp also sounds better than the WiiM when paired with a pair of KEF LS50 Meta. That's what another commenter wrote beneath our original video. Now sure, that could be because the Sonos offers more watts per channel than the WiiM. Or maybe it's because the Sonos has a higher quality amp chip inside than the WiiM. But let us not forget that the WiiM amp sells for $299 and the Sonos amp sells for $699. There's a $400 delta there. So we would bloody well expect the Sonos amp to sound better than the WiiM amp for that kind of price differential. But now comes a bit of a twist. Because if it were me looking for an amp for the LS50 Meta, I'd go for the WiiM amp and put the $400 saving on the Sonos towards the cost of a subwoofer. Because the WiiM amp will high pass the KEF to shift the bass burden from its mid-bass driver to the subwoofer. So that means that the WiiM amp won't have to work as hard as it did before, and also you'll get full range sound, which you wouldn't get with a KEF Sonos pairing. When we have a subwoofer crossed over with a two-way loudspeaker using low and high pass filtering, the potency of that speaker amp becomes less critical. But let's wrap things up with this thought. If I were putting together a €1,000 hi-fi system in 2024, I would have the WiiM amp drive a pair of Pro-Ject Speaker Box 5 S2, about which we recently made a video. Because in Europe, the Pro-Ject speakers sell for roughly €600 and the WiiM amp goes for around €350, which still leaves us €50 for speaker cables. Now I think this combination works well because the Pro-Ject speakers have an 88 dB sensitivity, which makes them a little bit easier to drive than your average two-way stand mount sitting at say 85 dB or 86 dB. And this WiiM Pro-Ject system also gives us a clear, direct subwoofer upgrade path. And we want for almost nothing in terms of streaming support. However, there is a challenger on its way to me, to this €1,000 hi-fi system, so please consider subscribing to this channel to make sure that you don't miss that video. And if you liked this video, please chuck us an hola in the comments section below. Thanks ever so much for watching. Now, two network streamers that have identical streaming suite. Obviously, I don't have that answer, but I sure as hell like to know if you do. And please, and that the Denon AV receiver streaming, yes, and the Denon simply doesn't have the streaming comprehensiveness that the Denon just doesn't have the streaming comprehensiveness, which clearly I value a lot, as much. The Denon if you know, let us know in the comment section below, because now I'll not argue that point too hard, because, but John, the Sonos AMP all sounds, but now comes a bit of a twist, because and when we have a subwoofer crossed over with a two-way loudspeaker using an